If you've ever attended any of my speeches, presentations, or workshops before, you will find one thing is common, that no two of them are the same, because no two audiences are the same, and we like to have audience participation. So while I'm giving my presentation, if any of you have any questions, let me know. Raise your hand, because that is the time to ask the question. I don't know how many times I've gone into a lecture and sat for an hour or 2 hours. Hundreds of questions came up. By the time they get to the Q&A at the end and you're going, okay, what was that question? You can't remember them. And it makes it real hard on you because you're stressing out sometimes for 10, 20, 30 minutes so that you can try to remember that question at the end. And then you're frustrated because you can't remember what the question was. And then when you leave the room, you get down the hallway, that was the question that flicks in your mind. You're going, that's what I wanted to ask. But how many of the people in the room wanted to ask the same question and didn't get that chance? Well, in here, we want to answer your questions. GEET Technology was formed about 4 years ago as a company and a trust so we could get technology out to the public. It was only going to be one product, the GEET technology. That was it. We didn't have other products. We figured just doubling or tripling the mileage and a 95 to 99% reduction of pollution was a good enough product to build a company on. We started setting up distributors all over the United States and Canada. We started training people. As the technology started to expand throughout the country, we had reporters get a hold of us, doing stories on us for foreign countries. We've received calls from just about every country on the planet, one after another. 700 different people that called into my home 2 years ago either drove or flew in to see us in Utah. We had moved 2 hours from the nearest airport. Didn't slow anybody down. We had visitors from Russia, from China, all over the United States. They couldn't get there fast enough. There were days that my wife and I had 20 to 30 visitors. Many of them never met each other. But they all came because they wanted to see the technology. Some wanted to prove it was a fraud. Several of the scientists came in, did not want to say at first that they were a PhD or a physicist or whatever their qualifications were. Their goal was to take this apart, to expose that somewhere inside that engine there was a hidden fuel tank. And they were convinced of this. My favorite scientist who came to the house to prove I was a fraud had heard his son wanted to buy distributorship rights for Ohio. And Mr. Sue told his son, this is physically impossible. And he got on a plane, an engineer got on the plane, and the son got on a plane. They came to Utah, and they spent 3 days taking every model apart that they could, putting it back together. During one of the presentations at our shop, he picked up the main rod that makes it work. And he turned it around, kept looking at it, and he says, this is no more complex than a paper clip. I don't understand why it works. They took it apart over and over. They finally came back to my house. And they sat across the table from me. And Molly's sister very casually asked him, what do you do for a living? And he said, I'm a nuclear physicist, retired. Well, I didn't know he was a scientist. I thought it was just this young guy's dad. So at that point I said, well, what do you make of my technology in scientific terms? He said, well, what you do in 12-inch rod, pieces and parts from a hardware store, we do in 7-mile circle underground. Big difference isn't the money, not the billions of dollars. The big difference is yours works. Mr. Sue decided he wanted to be a distributor in Kansas, so he bought the rights to Kansas, and his son ended up getting Michigan and Ohio. Just the fact that you can take people that have spent their entire life focused on there's only one way, and let them take it apart and put it back together. When they're all done, they say, okay, I made a mistake. But it really is nice when they want to stand beside you to help you market your product and turn around and go back to their colleagues and say, hey, we blew it. This really works. 3 days ago when we got here, I received a call from another one of our state distributors, and he said while he was waiting for his wife in a bookstore, he happened to pick up a magazine, which is printed in London. And as he was flipping through the science journal, there was a paragraph where he spotted my name. And it was a scientist over there saying, if anybody out there knows how to reach Paul Pantone, please let him know we'd like him to come over here. And we can't find his phone number anywhere. And I was like, well, that's kind of neat. Can't find me? Just run an article in the newspaper or a magazine. Molly and I, during the last 8 months, have visited 37 or 38 states. We've met with hundreds of people. It's been an experience. But we're ending our journey on the road here. Tomorrow we're going to be getting married here on stage after the workshop. And then we're heading back to Salt Lake. Within the next 30 days, we anticipate having our first 18-wheeler going down the road, getting triple the mileage on diesel. Today we were approached by some city people that are interested in converting about 5,000 vehicles right here in Phoenix. It is starting to explode from every direction. People want the technology yesterday. They don't want to wait any longer. And it's our government who's really helping us the best by passing all of these laws and setting up that phony organization called the EPA, where they tell the states, well, you've got to do this and you've got to do that. Yet, if you get the letter that I have, and it says that the EPA program is voluntary, how many of you out here volunteered to have smog control garbage put on your car? I didn't think so. Yet if you take any of it off, they want to nail you with fines. And they have nailed people with fines. Muffler shops, 25 to 50 grand a pop for taking off the catalytic converters, if they catch you. So do you have a right to triple your mileage? I believe you do. And we're going to go ahead and continue selling product. And I'm not worried about the EPA rules, because if my pollution is zero, what right do they have to say that I have to take it off the car? Tom, would you like to come up and show the people how simple the paperclip is? Are there any questions at this time? The unit Tom is taking part right now is the simplest version we could build of GEET technology so that we could show you that a gasoline engine does not need gasoline. It can run off everything from crude oil. We've had battery acid. Right now, Tom has a solution in there of pickle juice. That's pickle juice, Mountain Dew, a little used engine oil, diesel, water, and what else? And a little gas. Is it coming out? We sent out about 60 of these engines all over the United States to all of our dealers so they could start showing the public the technology, how it works, and why. We didn't really understand some of the other phenomenon that's going on within the unit. One of the phenomenon we found was when they took it apart, and all the dealers did, they had to take it apart to see what's inside, what makes it work. They put it back together, and they'd call up and say, Paul, the engine doesn't work. I said, well, it worked when it went out of here. They were all tested. I said, well, it's not working now. We couldn't figure out why, so we had a bunch of them shipped back to us. We took them apart, examined everything, couldn't see anything wrong with them, put them back together. They wouldn't work. So we started replacing parts on them. It took rebuilding about 50 of them before we finally found out that the metal rod inside the unit has a fingerprint the first time you start the engine up. And if you take the rod out and turn it around and put it back in backwards, it doesn't work. So we had a lot of fun trying to figure that one out. There was another frustrating time with these engines where I would start the engine up, hooked to my analyzer, and it would have 0 emissions. It's perfect burn. I was really happy. I grabbed that engine, load it up in the car, and I go down to a friend's place to show him. I hook it up to his analyzer. There's pollution. A 90% reduction, but still there's some pollution. I take it back to the shop and try it again, and over. At my shop, it didn't pollute. At other people's shops, sometimes it did. Now keep in mind, I've been running these since 1983. All of a sudden one day, I'm working at my bench with the engine in front of me, and one of the other mechanics needs to use that side of the bench. I said, no problem, I'll just move the engine over to the other side and I'll work from over there. Well, it's hooked up to the analyzer, and as I start to turn the machine, I see the pollution level starting to go up. I turn the machine back and it goes down. It wasn't until 17 years after coming up with the idea that I realized that the magnetic field of the planet affects the performance of the engine. When the hot end of the rod is pointing due north, you get minimum pollution, and you can achieve 0. You can actually achieve 1 to 2% more oxygen coming out the tailpipe. But turn the machine around 180 degrees, and you get about 5 to 10% more pollution. So it's small phenomena like this that has taken all of this testing, and because of this, it's so widely misunderstood that some of the scientists that have come up with theories have thrown the theories back at Molly and I, and Molly says, no, this is what it's doing. And she has walked many of the scientists one step at a time through different theories. Is it Rodney? Oh, okay. That is the infamous rod that's in the center. It's just plain old everyday steel. You can go to the hardware store, you can buy it in 3 or 4 foot lengths. The length of the rod determines what fuel you're going to use. If you're using a long chain molecule, hydrocarbon from crude oil, you want a long rod. If you're using gasoline or gas mixed with water, light fuels, you want a short rod. Short chain, short rod. That is the entire complicated part of the unit. But knowing the exact length and diameter for the fuel you're using can take years to run all the figures. Also, you have to then consider the different octanes of fuels, and as we bought fuel going around the country, it all has different additives. In California, they had one chemical. Over in another area, they had another chemical. You're not going to get the same grade even from the same gas station as far as Texaco, coast to coast, or Chevron. We did find, using these units on multiple fuels, it is a lot easier to regulate the engine on crude oil and denser products than it is on gasoline. That is the least efficient fuel. Well, other than natural gas and propane, your gasoline is one of the least efficient fuels you can find. Methane from the top of your septic tank has a lot more energy in it than gasoline. Yep. That rod is a little bit dirty because it has been using every kind of stuff. From pickle juice, pop, you name it, we do it. Oh. I handed him right back the way I took it out. He'll have it back together in a few minutes, and we'll run the engine for you. In the meantime, one of the theories that we had that Molly has clarified for a lot of scientists is thermal inertia. Many years ago, when I was in the beginning of this, I also was doing a little dabbling with solar energy. And we found that there was a major problem on the coastal areas of California where a lot of the solar collectors had been damaged because of the drain down systems. We were told that they malfunctioned, and when the systems did not drain down, they allowed the water to stay in the collectors would freeze and break. At UCLA, at Sierra College, at Berkeley, at a lot of the big universities, they lost millions of dollars worth of equipment because they said it was defective equipment. Well, it wasn't. It was misunderstood equipment. The systems were set up so that if the temperature, outside temperature, at your collector dropped below 37 or 38 degrees, it would then drain your system down. If it didn't drop to that temperature, then it would stay full of water. Well, that brings me to the new theory. The only one here is a black one or a red one. If you go to Circle K, 7-Eleven, they have the stores with the nice little glass refrigerators so you can see what you're going to buy. They're normally around 38 degrees. You take a cup of water, 40 degrees, and place it in there. Right next to that, you place a cup of water that's 200 degrees. Come back in 35 minutes. You're going to find the 40-degree water has only gone down to just about 39. But for some reason, the 200-degree water, as it was rapidly trying to achieve 38 degrees and started picking up a thermal inertia heading downward, it couldn't stop at 38 degrees. It freezes. Because of a temperature drop happening so fast, it cannot stop at the temperature. It goes beyond the temperature. After Molly was explaining this to me, I'm sitting here going, that's what my mom used to tell me. If you're making ice cubes, hot water. If you're going to boil water, use cold water. It'll boil faster. I thought my mom was a little loony on that one. But you'd be surprised on how many scientists that we've met with in the United States that when we draw that one up there, they all do the same thing. Mama used to say that. But it's not clearly written in a science book. So the teachers that have invited us to come in and lecture at their universities are very open-minded at this point. When they start looking at the simplicity of what we're doing and how it works, they realize that there's a lot of things that have been overlooked. Are you ready to run that one? We also started shipping out generators for public use about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. We've now got it perfected much better than it was before, so that there's a lot less adjusting to do. There's one valve that when you first start it up, you choke it. If it's running on gas, you go one click. If you're running on gas mixed with crude oil, or not crude, but diesel or kerosene, you go to the second spot. If it's anything heavier, you push it all the way to the third spot. That's it. No further adjusting needed. That generator normally, with factory equipment, gets about 6 hours to 6.5 hours on a tank, 5-gallon tank of gas. Depending on what fuel you're using, whether it's gas or a mix, you can get anywhere from 12 to 18 hours off a 5-gallon tank, while you're reducing that pollution level by 90 to 95%. After you. That's normally, if you hold a white handkerchief up over a lawnmower, it's black in a hurry. We were watching CNN there, I think it was in California a while back, and they were saying that the city of Los Angeles, as well as many other cities, were going to be banning these type engines for lawnmowers. Well, it was because one of these engines can put out more pollution in an hour than 63 cars do. Well, with our device on there, this is running at about a 95 to 99% reduction in pollution. You would think that all of those politicians that are saying, clean up the pollution, they'd show up at some of these meetings. We've invited governor's offices from coast to coast as we get into their states to show up, bring their air quality control people. We want to show you what we can do. They never show up. The gentleman that was here earlier from the city of Phoenix, he is in charge of their alternative fuels program. He said, no one in the program really likes what they're doing, but it's mandatory. They're supposed to convert a certain number of vehicles over to something else to show that they're cooperating with federal government mandates. He was telling me the other day that one of the police cars had a small gas leak from the liquefied natural gas. When it ignited, the police officer jumped out of the car, grabbed his fire extinguisher, and he says, do you have any idea how hard it is to put out a bottle of natural gas that's under pressure? The fire extinguisher didn't phase it, and the car was totaled. We've got these bombs going down the road now on buses, in police cars, in all the county vehicles, and they're not safe. The GEET technology is far superior to what they're currently trying to do, but you can't get most of those people out here. We were supposed to have had Fox News here a couple of days ago, and Molly and I have found as we've traveled around the country that if you get the right person on the phone at the radio station and TV station, they'll come down. If the producers of those shows, especially in bigger cities, hear that this type technology is going to be shown, they will not be there. In 1985, the first time I went on the news, I had received threats the following morning from state agencies, oil companies. There were a lot of people that were very upset with what I had to say. I taped all those calls so that if any of them came back to haunt me, I could play it word for word and let them hear what they said, in case they forgot. But I also called the reporter back. And I said, Kent, you think the story you had last night was something? I've got Perdamina Oil Company on tape saying that it's worth millions to them to have me done in. Now, you want a story? I got a story. I've been threatened by the State of California Air Quality Control Board, and they want me in prison. Well, I went on a few more minutes with him, telling him some of the other calls, and he says, Paul, you don't understand. I said, what do you mean I don't understand? He said, I got a call this morning, too. Even if you walk on water, you're not going to be on the news again. We're not allowed to cover you. I said, what do you mean you can't cover me? He said, Paul, when my producer found out that I put you on the show without his permission specifically on this technology, he says, if I ever cover you again, I don't have a job. There's no TV station that would allow me to do a news broadcast if I cover you again. So don't call me. We did find another reporter that was really eager to cover us. It was about 2 weeks after that. She did not ask her boss either. We got to the station. They were all set up in the studio. We went in, set the engine up. I got 2 minutes of time before the producer realized what I was talking about. When he saw what I was talking about, he ran over, flipped a switch, and they went right to a commercial, and I was escorted out of that building. He was not very pleasant. He also told the young lady that she is never going to bring another guest on her show without permission. But she failed to tell him that the inventor wanted to show an engine. All she mentioned to him was she had an inventor coming on. Well, we have been lucky and very fortunate at the different shows where the cameras are rolling. This last year we had 13 or 14 cameras rolling on us when we were up at the Tesla conference. Any of you who ordered that video, I have to apologize for them. The camera crews that were there didn't get all the sound. And they went ahead and sent the tapes out without sound on parts. It was worse than that because after 3.5 hours of footage, the producer they had there came out and said, I forgot to turn the sound switch on completely. So they had to dub it off somebody else's camera. But in the meantime, somehow the equipment was faulty and the tape was messed up. The GEET technology on our car right now, when it was first installed at our shop, was not installed according to my instructions. It was supposed to have been set up to run on gas, diesel, or kerosene. A couple of our shop people got a little creative and decided, well, let's try it on water. And I'd already told them I did not want to go to jail, so do not use water as a fuel in a car. Lo and behold, they called me up and said they had the thing smog tested up in Salt Lake and it failed. It only had 5 parts per million hydrocarbon, and that's too clean to be registered. That's the case here in Arizona as well. We heard it from the state people today. They said, can't pass. If it's too clean, we cannot give you a certificate. So if your car is too clean, folks, you can't drive it. If it's too dirty, you can't drive it. You got to be just in the middle. But during the tour, we have found many of the people really don't care what the government thinks, or they want these on their car, and they want them now. We've sold a few hundred sets of plans, and the people who have the plans, many of them don't even want their neighbors to know that they bought the plans. They don't want receipts. They don't want their name in my log because they're afraid that sooner or later the government's going to come in and grab all those plans. Well, they can't. They're out there. And they're out in Christian communities from coast to coast and in different countries. They're in universities now in Germany. We've had some testing done up in Canada. One of the laboratory test people up in Canada used liquid bodily waste, 50% mixed with gasoline, and found that that was 30% more efficient than just gas. That, I think, really got all the rest of the dealers going on who can come up with the craziest cocktail. At the Wisconsin show 2 weeks ago, the dealer up there put out an announcement, a challenge. Bring the worst junk you can for a fuel and we'll run it. Well, people brought in chicken waste, cow waste, people waste, you name it. They brought it into that show. And once every hour, hour and a half, they'd do the contest. Amazingly, it ran on everything that was brought. Are there any questions at this time? How does it operate? That's a good one. If you're going to be doing it as a multi-fuel unit, not just gas, diesel, and kerosene, but for other fuels, if you want to call it that, you should use a container called a bubbler, like the jar is. On the bubbler, you have air coming in, goes all the way to the bottom through a plate with a bunch of holes in it. Then the vapor comes up through there and is captured from the top and fed over to the exhaust pipe. If you want to stabilize that so it's a continuous run, you need to put a float on there. You can go down to the parts store and you can buy a float for $79, or you can go down to the wrecking yard and buy a float, the little ones, for $5. So there's several ways of regulating that. Once the vapor here is pulled into the exhaust pipe, you've got exhaust going in one direction and the vapor coming in the exhaust pipe from the other direction around the steel rod that we just showed you. If you only are heating just the outer surface of this, and that's where the gas has to go, there's a tremendous heat exchange occurring. As this happens, you'll find this end of the rod will turn to north, this end of the rod will be south. The pipe inside will have north here, south here. On the outside of the muffler pipe, you'll find north here, south here, and north here. Another phenomenon, if you take that rod out that has the north and south and put it on the table so that north is pointed north, and you run a compass along it, you'll see that north is the extreme tip, and south is the extreme tip. But when you reverse it, you've got north here and south here. You flip that rod over, and you'll find that north is no longer at that end where it was. North will travel this direction if it's pointed south, and south will travel this direction in the metal. The distances they travel is in proportion to where you are on the planet from the North Pole to the equator. Because of that physical change as it's flipped over, if you take the rod out and put it back in backwards, don't plan on it running. Once the vapors leave this area here and get blended with fresh air, they can be fed in to the carburetor or right into the air intake. That is the simplest method. There are other formulas that go with this, and this is why we do sell plans, so that people who want to buy the plans will get the formulas so that they know how to put it on their own vehicles, lawnmowers, motorcycles, whatever technology they want to apply it to. The generator system we have in the other room, which sells for $13.50, is set up right now for gas, diesel, and kerosene. If you were to install a bubbler pot like this, you could actually run it 8 to 10 hours a day right off your septic tank, the vapor. And that's for a family of 3 people. If it's a larger family, you can get a lot more running time out of it. Well, we have a Christian community up in New Brunswick, where they're anticipating their city sewage plant for 240 people in that community. They'd like to use all of the methane just to run generators. They're putting in a 22-acre hothouse for their food storage and growing. There's a lot of these communities popping up all over the world that they want to use as much of the GEET technology on their equipment as they can. So we've had them come in from all over the country, and they're now being trained and out building the units. Are there any other questions? Yes. Yes, compost would be fine. You can also use the lawn clippings. One of the gentlemen doing the lawn clippings right now in Indiana reported back to me that a 9-hole golf course would supply enough methane from the lawn clippings, if it cuts once a week, based on the system he's built, that it should power the place 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that would save some of those golf courses a lot of money. Yes?
Have you placed a compass near the motor in different spots and looked at the effect on the compass to see what type of fields are being generated and how the compass responds to it?
Yes. We have checked it with compasses and Gauss meters. The specific field that is generated is normally between this point and this point. If you were to try to read it from the ends, you will not find an energy field, only in this area. During one of the runs, just a few miles north of here last April. We had a different unit there for a demonstration that when you turn the lights out and no gas line touching here and no steel rod underneath here touching, it was supported from the end. As you run the engine, you would see a glow of electricity come up, go all the way across, and come back into here. It looked like somebody had about a 500-watt light bulb filament just sitting there in midair. It's self-generated, and it stayed there for about 35 to 40 seconds before the engine was shut off. Several of the scientists we've met with have predicted that there is more energy coming out of the metal that needs to be captured than this engine can even produce from the shaft.
Okay, the exhaust pipe setup there sits in the area of the magneto. There's like a permanent magnet in there to generate power to fire the spark plug. Is it critical that that location be exact there, or can the exhaust be rerouted in a different position?
The exhaust can be routed in just about any other direction without a problem. On this particular model, because it is trying to be grounded as quickly as possible, that's why we have it mounted here, we're trying to keep the electrical field as intense but inside the metal instead of outside.
Okay, so the magneto has no effect on the system?
No.
Thank you.
During a couple of the tests, when we had scientists over, we got reports back how we wiped out their credit cards. So whenever we're running one of these around you, don't put your credit cards within a foot of the unit, unless you don't want to use them again. I mean, that would be one way to make sure that she can't go out and buy what she wants tomorrow, right? No. That's one of the questions that usually gets asked at every show during my presentation. There are about 25 to 30 different ways of utilizing just pure water. I came up with the best system I could back in 1983. I drew up very detailed plans, and I put those out in 1985 and 86 to 20 different churches, and I said the only time these are ever to be opened is if something happens to me, my family, or my company. And then get copies of these out to everybody in the congregation as fast as you can, and tell them to make all the copies they want. Because if oil companies want to shut me down, then I think I should shut them down. But those are not going to be released to the public at this time. Any other questions?
Paul, you mentioned methane gas. A motorhome with a holding tank. Seems like a good source of methane.
Well, the holding tank on those is quite small in comparison to the amount you'd need. You might be able to get 4 to 5 hours use of one of the normal holding tanks on those. But yes, we've got a few people playing with that right now.
The question I was getting into is the bubbler involved in that, or is it straight gas into the...
Anytime you're taking methane, natural gas, cold vapor, wood vapor, anything like that, you should have a bubbler to isolate any backflash that could occur. Because an engine could backfire. And if for any reason it did, you don't want it flashing back into your source of fuel. But the water does stop backflashes. Mike, one of our leading technicians, built a smoker box, similar to the ones they used to use in Germany to put coal and wood in. Only his smoker box, once he got it started, he sealed it off, ran the hose over to this engine, and the exhaust coming out of here smelled like fresh flowers. You know, he came running in after he built it, and he said, "Man, you got to come out here. You got to see this one." So I went out, and it was the first unit he'd built. When he returned back to Pennsylvania shortly after that, he wanted to put one on his Plymouth Duster. And he called me and told me he had it on his Plymouth Duster, and he described it to me. And I really thought, boy, this guy's got a wild imagination. But he said he had taken about a 6-inch by 5-inch block of oak, bored out the center where the air intake was, drilled the holes, bolted that down, and then built a wooden box for the air intake. And I'll tell you what, it's a good-looking wooden box, and it works. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever seen mechanics when they open the hood up and they don't recognize something, but that one really messed with the mechanics' minds. When they open that hood up and they see a little wooden box, And they're looking, what is this? He said, that's my carburetor. A wooden carburetor? Well, yeah, the other one's messed up, and he reaches down in the wheel well and picks up the other carburetor, and he says, this one didn't work all that well. This one works a lot better. You get some great responses. Of the 450 inventors that have approached us in the last few years, there have been a few that wanted us to market their product ASAP. They were great technologies. You follow up on them a little later, and all of a sudden you find out they sold to GM, Ford, and Chrysler. They're not interested in helping mankind. They're just interested in how fast can I put the buck in my pocket. Our company has a different profile there. We want to help mankind. And there's a lot of technology out there, some of it that's been hidden for 100 years, and we're trying to bring it all out of the closet as fast as we can. We are looking for manufacturers and people to work with our company in just about every field. We do have a few packages available over at our booth telling you which products are available. We do print a newsletter. If you'd like to get a copy of the newsletter, pick one up over at our booth, and also put your name on the mailing list. And if you don't want your name on the mailing list, you can always just put John Doe, care of that address, and it'll get to you. Are there any other questions? Yes?
Does your system work with carbureted or fuel-injected engines, or both, or neither?
E, all of the above. It can be applied as a furnace, as a boiler, any application of energy. So if you're trying to find 2 to 3 times your efficiency, this will work. Yes?
Yeah, I just noticed, I couldn't see very well from the back of the room, but your rod in this one didn't look like the same as the rod in the one we pulled apart in April. Is it not round?
This is round.
Oh, that's a round
Yeah.
rod? Oh, okay. It didn't look round to me back then.
We have tried just about every configuration of a rod we can. There are a couple of designs that are a little bit more superior than this, but when you're talking about having a rod machined out of a high-quality metal that's costing you $200 a pop, or you go to the store and get one for $2, you stick with the $2 model when there's only 1% difference. Are there any other questions? Yes?
Yes, sir. Could you tell how did you stumble into this invention?
I stumbled into this invention because I really felt I can get better mileage. And many years ago, I was told I would have some great inventions that scientists would never understand, and that I was to help mankind. And when I started playing with gasoline engines, I was trying to get a 10% increase. Once I accomplished a 10% increase, I said, well, if I can get 10%, I know I can get 20. Then I got up to 30, and then 50. And I figured if I can get 50%, I've got to be able to get 100. Once I got up to the 100% range, I went, whoa, double my mile. I'm really happy. And then I was looking at this smog level. I said, well, wait a minute. If I can reduce smog by 70%, I wonder if I can get it down to 0. So it kept pushing me. And you'll find this with a lot of inventors. You start working on something, and you're not satisfied with it till you know it's perfect. And no matter how perfect it is, you always feel you can make it a little bit better. And that's where most inventors don't get their product to the market. They spend the rest of their lives trying to make it to their satisfaction instead of what's going to sell to the public. So I finally put my foot down when I got 0 emission. During one of my tests, I said, that's it, we're going public. It's going to get out to the people. Yes?
So what's the difference in torque running on your alternative fuels compared to just straight gasoline? Is there much of a difference in torque? For like, let's say you have an application like a alternator or something that you're turning.
As far as the energy outputs of the unit, we do not have an exact reading. We have some calculations done that when we're running on battery acid and salt water, 80% salt water, getting this engine up to 10,000 RPM instead of 3,600 RPM, we should have been putting out somewhere around 22 horse.
I'm talking when you have a load on it.
The generators, we have governors on them so that you cannot exceed the 5K.
So it does pull, you get good torque?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes. We, how about a glass rod? A ceramic rod, I'm sorry. Molly's brother put one of those in and ran the engine for about 20 minutes, took it apart, set it down on the table, and when he looked over, he realized the compass needle had moved. And he looked at it again, grabbed the compass, and held it down against the metal, and it also had the same fingerprint. So it doesn't matter what you put in there. As long as you are properly spacing it into the dead center of that plasma reaction, it'll work. Copper, brass, steel, we've tried just about everything. But the cheapest product was steel, and that's the one that works just about the best. Yes?
You mentioned about the length of the rod
Yes.
from different fields. You think how to make like the adjustable rod to move around like this, like antenna?
We have adjustable rods. We also have the floating rods. We have experimented with all styles, and there are numerous different ways of doing it and still be successful on running it. Okay, yes. Well, let's put it this way. We put this on a brand new Ford pickup 2 years ago, and the minute this thing was up and running, ready to go, the transmission says, no, you are not going to engage. The dash said, no, nothing is going to work. You could not drive the car because the computer was saying it is not operating, will not function. When we took this to Briggs & Stratton back in 1987 and hooked it up to their computer in their dyno rooms at their lab, they punched in all the parameters they could, and the computer kept coming up, cannot operate, even though the engine was running. The pollution level was too low. They could not read the temperature in the bottom like they normally would because the engine was running too cold. During the third day of testing, we were running it on #1 fuel oil. And the intense reaction from #1 fuel oil was so great that the exhaust pipe was filling with ice. At that point, they determined that this was something that would be very popular in third world countries, but they wouldn't touch it here. On this model, it will not be hooked to most of them with computers unless we find somebody that can bypass those computers. Some of the 81, 82s that we're looking at, we can bypass the computers. But on the brand new ones, they've got those things so that it's pretty hard to get by them. Yes?
Question. The spacing between the rod and the pipe that it fits inside of, is that critical?
Yes.
Can you tell us how much space you got?
Well,
you dare tell
if
us
you
that?
buy the plans, I will.
Oh, okay.
Was the problem with the vehicles running the like the oxygen sensor keeps saying no, not enough oxygen, or was it not
Too
enough?
much oxygen.
Too much oxygen.
Yeah.
So, you know, George Wiseman sells a little product that fools the oxygen sensor. Maybe that might be the ticket right there.
Yes, he just gave me one a little while ago. We're going to be checking that real quick. Any more questions?
How much are the plans?
Oh, the plans are $650, and that allows you up to 10 installations for yourself or your family or a partner if you want to have a partner with you.
Can you hire installation?
Yeah. Yeah, the average person isn't going to have all the parts they need in their garage. You'd probably have to work with a mechanic or somebody that has welding and just the basic tools. Okay, 2 last questions and we're out of here.
Can you touch on the diesel fuel systems, what your expectations are for the big trucks and the smaller diesel pickups and stuff like that?
Based on our past experience in diesels, we anticipate a minimum of triple the mileage, and we hope to get started on that within the next week to 10 days. they're complete enough that you can go home and build one. Yes. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Paul.